Hi everyone. On March 9th, the Holy Orthodox Church celebrates the memory of Saint Caesarius of Nazianzus. Now, most of us, when we hear the name Caesarius, we might think perhaps of Cleopatra's brother or something like that. But Caesarius had, an equally favored family, and in the end result, much greater than that which Cleopatra ever enjoyed. His brother was none other than St. Gregory the Theologian, or St. Gregory of Nazianzus. His father was Bishop Gregory, and his mother was Nona. He had an elder sister named Gorgonia, and a maternal uncle named Amphilochius of Iconium. As it happens, all of these people are saints of the Orthodox Church, and not just saints, but great saints who left a profound impression not only on the people of the time, but also for us many, many years later, and influenced the proclamation, the true proclamation of the faith in many, many ways. Now, Caesarius, coming from such stock, much was expected from him, and indeed much was delivered also. He decided to go to Alexandria for his studies, and of course at that time Alexandria was the place to be if you wanted to learn anything about anything. Although it is possible that he spent some time with his brother St. Gregory in Athens at one point. We don't have any records of this, though it is certainly probable that he did this. But his time in Alexandria was well spent. He studied many, many things, mathematics, rhetoric, geometry, astrology even, philosophy. You name it, he poured his heart and soul into these different fields of inquiry and mastered them all. In fact, it was said that he had such a great knowledge of all of these subjects that his knowledge was far greater than those who specialized in any one of them. But he also knew that there were some things that he had to be careful with, like astrology and even back then some things about geometry. But he knew exactly what to take from these disciplines and what to reject. But what he came out of Alexandria mainly with was as a physician, and not just a regular physician, but a great physician whose renown would spread near and far by the time his rather short life was ended. He came to Byzantium, and in Constantinople was offered the position of chief physician to the court. Well, his brother St. Gregory was a little disturbed by this and asked him to come instead with him, which he did for a brief time, but then again he returned back to Byzantium and was engaged in all sorts of charitable work in terms of unmercenary work for his services as a physician, and at one point was even asked to be the protector of the city, a position which he really wanted, but then St. Gregory again asked him to leave, but then again he came back and began to offer his services to the poor, the destitute, and anyone in that particular area at the time. Now, when the Emperor Constantius died, Julian, known as Julian the Apostate to most Orthodox, ascended the throne and was not exactly pleased with the Christian proclamation of Caesarius. But he was also a little bit afraid of Caesarius and was also a little intrigued by the great volume of influence that Caesarius had. Julian, being a very vain man, wanted to partake of this. Ultimately, he engaged in a series of debates with Caesarius, and Caesarius is said to have bested him on all accounts, even though Julian was a very clever man and engaged in many sophistries in order to persuade his audience. Well, after this happened, because Julian was still, albeit shortly, on the throne, Caesarius had to sort of fade away into away from the limelight and into a perhaps quieter life until the next emperor came along and restored him to his former favors. Now, not too much longer after this, he found himself again in the city of Nicaea, where there was a tremendous earthquake, one that very few people survived. And in fact, it was true that Caesarius and only a few others escaped. And Caesarius, who had been proclaiming Christianity his entire life, was so stricken with God's favor that he was able to escape that terrible situation, that he finally decided it was time for him to be baptized. He had never been baptized before this, although he was known to be a Christian and was proclaiming Christianity, but something came over him at this point, as St. Gregory, the theologian himself, notes in his funeral oration for his brother. He changed. He understood that it was not so much glory that he should seek, even though he was doing it for God and in the name of God and helping people everywhere. But this time he decided that he would still help people, but he was going to dedicate the rest of his life solely to God and devote himself to the church. Well, as it turns out, this was not to be, because Caesarius, who had spent so much time among so many desperately sick and ill people, and being only a human being himself and subject to the mortality that all of us have to deal with, he caught something, a severe illness, and he died. And he died at the age of 40 in the year 368. He was an amazing man from an amazing family, and like so many, it seems, who come from strong families who end up revolting against the families or the parents simply because they want to be different or find something wrong in their own philosophy of life, St. Caesarius was not like that. He embraced the things that he was taught by his father, his mother, his older sister, his uncle, and most of all, his beloved brother Gregory. And in doing so, left a profound mark on Constantinople, Byzantium, Nicaea, the whole area around the center of power at that time, and would remain so for so many years. He was quite noted for his virtues, and St. Gregory proclaimed all of these at his funeral. He is someone not quite as well known to us, but someone who should be known, because although he spent most of his life as a physician, and he left no writings or things like that for us to contemplate, like members of his family did, it was still by the virtue of his self-sacrifice and self-service and dedication to the poor and the destitute, and trying to help them as much as he could, that should serve as a great example for all of us striving to live the life in Christ today. Bye-bye.